Welcome to Business Way TV. This is Vietnam edition. Today we will discuss another intriguing topic, the negotiation skill. And please welcome with us our special guest, Mr. Thijs Van Loon, the CEO and founder of Better Work Asia, and he will share with us many tips for a good negotiation. Hello Thai, how are you? Can you introduce yourself?
Sure thing, yeah. So my name is Thijs, I am from the Netherlands, and I have been in Vietnam now for about 4.5 years. Set up my business about 2.5 years ago, and my business is all about training and coaching, and also about consulting for learning and development. So this basically means that I help organizations set up their learning structure, their learning strategy, and everything that they need in their organization to learn. And part of that is also that I do a lot of training. Now, when we talk about negotiation skills, this is one of these trainings that people request a lot from me. It's a topic that is really important for many people to learn and to focus on. And it's also something that you can actually use everywhere, right? So that's why this is such a popular topic.
As you worked many years in international trade, you did many negotiations. So what is a structure of a negotiation?
So when you look at negotiating in Vietnam, right, and especially when I would negotiate with Vietnamese people, there's a couple of things that I see, and that's not just my experience, but also things that I hear back from people who are in my workshops. And what typically people tell me is that in the beginning of a negotiation, the speed of a negotiation is very slow, right? There's a couple of reasons for this, right? So the first one is many people take their time because lots of time they're not the decision makers who are in the room. And that means that they need to report back to the people who are the actual decision makers on the type of deal that you want to make. So this means that lots of time when you have conversations, there are long silences, during the conversation. So people try and get as much information out of you as possible. And also the conversation, lots of time revolves around price. But once the negotiations are actually going, and once you're actually getting to the point where you're starting to make a deal, and once the price is set, right, then all of a sudden the negotiations really speed up. And at the end, once a deal is struck, then your customer in Vietnam typically expects you to immediately run, as fast as you can with whatever it is that you've decided to arrange for them, right? So basically negotiations are slow, but once a deal is made, people want to go like 100 miles an hour, and that's something you definitely need to be prepared for when you're here in Vietnam. Yeah.
What you share is what you share belongs to Asian culture. And here the decision maker, or we can say the chairman, usually they are covered and they did not appear.
Right.
And what you share in that situation, it can lengthen the negotiation. I think that everyone would like to know that when they are in the negotiations, what attitude they should have and what they should prepare for a good negotiation.
Yeah, very good point. So, first of all, to your point where you say, well, lots of time the leader is covered, right? The manager or the director, or basically whoever the decision maker is covered. And good ways for you as a negotiator to get around this is just to simply ask the question, well, first of all, of course, is the decision maker actually in the room? And sometimes just asking that question already is a very good question to ask, so you actually know where you stand. Then the second part after that is, well, if the decision maker is not in the room, then maybe we can say, hey, what kind of things can we decide on today that you know that your decision maker will be okay with? And what are the topics that we cannot decide on today? Yeah. So when you already ask these two questions, it becomes a bit more clear about what you can focus on that day, and therefore what you need to get out of that conversation. Right? Now, when you think about your overall attitude, when you're negotiating is and I train this a lot with people, right? Negotiating depends also on your own personality. There are some people who negotiate and they want to win. You have some people who negotiate that just want to have a great relationship. And there are some people, when they negotiate, they want to make sure that it's like a very fair exchange of everything. Right? Now, lots of time when your focus is on, for example, being right or winning, right? That means that you're trying to overcome or push the other side. But this usually goes away from the part where what negotiations really need to be about. Because when you negotiate, what you need is basically to gather information. That is our main job. We need to find out who the other people are, who we are, what they need and what we can offer them, and how this in the best possible scenario matches. Right? So that's essentially what our attitude needs to be when we negotiate with people. Not to win, but to find out what's really going on. And from there, you can start to decide, okay, how do we get to a point where you get what you want and I get what I want, right? And we are both still happy to work together. Right? And that's always in the balance, right? When you negotiate. A great negotiation, a great deal is all about that. We both get what we want, but we do it in a way that we can still both be happy to work together.
What you share make a negotiations very subtight, and in such a subtight condition, or we can say that room like that. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us what we should do and what we should not do, like the do and the don't in negotiation?
The do's and the don'ts of negotiation. Well, I think one main thing to think about is like, let's start with the don'ts, right? Don't try to be somebody else. I see people who come into a negotiation and they feel like, okay, I really need to push for a deal, right? But they themselves are not very assertive people, right? But at some stage their boss has told them, you have to make sure that you have a deal and these are the requirements that I need for it. And then they start to push, but they themselves are not pushy people. And when you are not a pushy person, but try to be pushy, yes, the person on the other side notices this, yes, right? And they will not really see you as somebody who is genuine. So the don't automatically gets to the do, which means be genuine about who you are, right? Be yourself and know through that what your main strengths and weaknesses are. What am I good at when I negotiate, right? For example, for me, I know that I'm not a very good pusher. That means though that as a weakness for me, I need to focus on knowing what I want and sticking to it. But what I'm good at is actually connecting with people, right? And that makes it easier for me to actually discuss deals and actually discuss what really is going on. Because people typically like talking to me, right? So, and this is essentially what I train people as well. It's like, well, I teach you like what type of negotiator you are. And that way, what your strengths and weaknesses are. And through that, I can coach you to focus on the right things for you. So you can actually have the best of both worlds and balance all the things that you need to have a great outcome for your negotiations.
It's very interesting. What you share is that the do's is that we should know ourselves and we should know the partners, so that we can create a good strategy in the negotiation. So every country has its own culture and custom. And for international business people, when they come to Vietnam, how can they build trust with Vietnamese?
Well, what I mentioned before, like being genuine, is also important for for international people coming here. So, like I mentioned, I am Dutch, and in the Netherlands, it's normal in our culture to be very direct. But what happens is, when I'm in the Netherlands and people from abroad are in the Netherlands and try to imitate that directness in culture towards the Dutch, they don't do a good job, right? They are direct, but in the wrong way.
It's not genuine.
No, exactly. Well, it's not genuine, but also it's just wrong. You know, the way it's done is just wrong. And same thing for me, right? When I, as a foreigner, come to Vietnam and I try and be, well, in certain ways aloof, or the way that I would see it, you know, as Vietnamese negotiators can sometimes be, this is not going to work for me because it is not something that's genuine to me. So I always suggest to people like not to do that. However, what does work is to understand and look around and ask people and be curious about, well, what is it that you do? What is it that you expect? And to listen to the types of questions that people ask, right? So for example, many people ask your age. And why do they do that? Because they want to know how to address you, going forward, right?
Yes.
The other thing is that we always need to be ready with our business cards, when we meet people. And thirdly, it's also really important to go drinking. Yeah. So they call it đi ngáo, I think, in Vietnam, right? So that means you go drinking with a potential future business partner. And the reason why that is that when I drink and I lower my boundaries, I lower my control over myself, so to speak, that's when the real genuine person comes out. And this is something that Vietnamese people really want to see, as I've come to understand it, because that shows who you really are, and also through that if you can be trusted or not, right? So when you go drinking, right, do that not too often, because you'll mess up your liver, I guess, but it is a very good way to start building trust, when you are in Vietnam.
And also to break the ice.
Yep.
And another point, why Vietnamese people ask for age, because in Vietnamese we have different pronouns to address people in different ages, in comparing with ourselves. So it is different in culture and in language. And usually people negotiate for the best price of a product or service. And according to you, how can people achieve that?
Well, price negotiation is always one of the main topics for many people that they feel they need to negotiate on. For me, and I train this to people a lot, price is very important to set, right? But beyond price, there are also many other conditions that you can actually negotiate on that not make price irrelevant, but that make price less important. However, when you do your preparation, I always let people focus on two things, right? So the first one is, well, when it comes to price or when it comes to conditions, what is the moment that you will walk away? So what is your absolute bottom line? You need to have that very clear. When you negotiate for price, a good way to do this is, well, typically you start at a range. Yeah. So for example, if you tell people, well, if you sell, let's say, a certain service, then when you go to company X, that service is usually sold between this price and this price, right? And you give them a minimum and a maximum. And then that gives you a very nice lead up to say, okay, so my price is actually this, because we provide this and this and that, right? So that's typically a good way to start your price negotiations. The other part around it is that you already start to think, and that's the other part of your preparation, about, well, what are certain commonly held interests that I, myself, but also the other party will have. And then what are non-opposing interests? So what are things that you are interested with and I don't really care about, and I'm interested and you don't really care about that too, right? So we can basically horse trade this way, right?
I see.
And then the third part that we need to prepare is then the opposing interests. So what is stuff that I want, but I know that you don't want, Because that's the stuff usually that takes the most time to decide upon between the two of us as we negotiate. So when you prepare these two things, your price negotiation, and then your commonly held interests, your non-opposing interests, and your opposing interests, then you already have a lot of things done for your typical negotiations.
You showed us that you do a lot of trainings and coaching. And what are some topics that come back to you again and again in the negotiations?
Well, good topic. There's many. I think one of the main questions that I get from foreigners who I train about negotiating in Vietnam is that they say, well, it's so hard to actually meet with the real decision makers. So how do I do that, right? And it kind of relates to what we mentioned earlier in this conversation. So how can I get the real decision makers in the room? Right? And that is, again, by highlighting during the negotiation or during the conversation, do we have the decision maker in the room? And if so, well, then we can just continue on, right? But if we don't have the decision maker in the room, what kind of topics do we need to move to another setting? And what kind of topics do we need to talk about here? What can we decide here between, let's say, the two of us? So that's a typical question I get from many foreigners, and also many foreigners ask, well, how do I deal with, the language barrier? Yeah. And that's typically done by, well, if you can, bringing somebody in your team,
Yes.
right, to who actually speaks Vietnamese. But also, as you express yourself as a foreigner, use short sentences, right? Use short, basically use short descriptions of what it is that you're trying to say. And also be aware that many Vietnamese people don't use like big gestures and such like, right? So many
Exactly.
Vietnamese people are a little bit timid and very calm in their body language.
Yes.
And also tend to take a lot of breaks, a lot of pauses. And they do this because they want to get more information out of you as they are quiet. Yeah. So what you need to do as a foreigner is also to calm down your amount of gestures, right? So
Yes.
you can connect better with people when you negotiate with Vietnamese people. And also to be okay sometimes with silence. And to actually also ask questions and to be okay with the silence that this brings. Right? On the other hand, you know, there's also Vietnamese people who I train a lot.
Yes.
And what they typically say is like, I find it difficult to take my place in a negotiation. Which means many times you have a negotiation with, let's say, a CEO, right? Or a director high up. And I see many Vietnamese people who either put themselves lower in that relationship during the negotiation with that, let's say, director, or actually feel superior. Right? And this is the trick. When you are negotiating with people, and this is what I tend to train many Vietnamese people, is like you are at a partnership level. You are there to create a partnership with other people.
It's mean equal.
Exactly. We are equal, right? We're not lower or higher, we're equal.
Yes.
And once we actually are equal, that is when we can set ourselves up as partners. That is when we can negotiate for deals that are long-term and that are impactful for both parties, right? So that's what I typically try and teach people. And that's also what I coach people on. Like, how can I create that mindset to make sure that I'm actually at the same level and I stay there?
I think what you recognize come from Asian culture too, because we, at the beginning in our language, we have different pronouns for different people, and it means that it creates a mindset that when it comes to a negotiations or a conversation, there needs to be someone lower and someone higher. This is very Asian culture. And another point I realized in my experience, I think you too, is in Vietnamese we don't have tenses. It means that in the way of expressions idea, they sometimes they can create some misunderstanding in the negotiations too.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you're bringing this up, right? Because the fact that in Vietnamese language there's a clear difference between, for example, older brother, younger brother,
Yes.
right? Uncle, Mr., Mrs., you know, all these kind of terms already shows that our role when we negotiate with people is already at a different level.
Yes.
And this is the trick, and this is basically the mindset change that I create when I coach Vietnamese people. Is I shift the mindset not between people, you know, from on a cultural basis, but as partners, right? Just like you, as let's say that you're an older sister at home, right? But you know, during the partnership, you feel like a younger sister because you're talking to somebody older, right? So basically, what I do is I change your role in that negotiation, not to somebody who is in this case a younger sister, but somebody who is at the same level, yeah? Who is at the same as at the level as a friend, yeah? Or as a partner.
I think what you share is very useful for Vietnamese people, especially in the negotiations between the Vietnamese, because when they come to the room and when they start to talk, they have to use different pronouns, and that is the moment that already divide who is lower and who is higher. So to correct that mindset, I think that Vietnamese people have to do a lot of trainings to turn the mindset into an equal condition.
No, they don't. So, and it actually makes sense what you're saying, right? But it's a mindset shift, and I actually coach people in this as well, to actually change your subconscious into a different belief when you are in the negotiation. So what I do during coaching then is that I actually don't change yourself, but I change your mindset when you negotiate into somebody who's a partner, rather than somebody who's an older or younger brother or older or younger sister, right? If you would do it the normal way, yes, but for my coaching, we can actually take a quick step in it and actually get quick results from it. Yeah, that's all I can say about that in this case. But yes, I can help people to work around that quite quickly. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your sharing. And I think that in Vietnam, and especially in the cooperations between the international business people and Vietnamese, we need that skill of negotiations.
Great stuff. Yeah.
Thank you for watching us, and we'll get back with other interesting informations.